Tonight on the Worldview Weekend Hour, Christianity and Marxism, a dialectical deception. What is the Hegelian dialectical process? How have capitalism and socialism been merged together? Why are so many young people interested in living in a socialist nation? In fact, a recent survey shows 58% of millennials would like to live under some form of socialism. How is it that socialism is now being embraced by mainstream evangelicalism? Not just the mainline liberals, but now mainstream evangelicals and evangelical organizations. How has this dialectical deception brought us to this point? And what can we do about it? The Worldview Weekend Hour begins right now.
WVW-TV presents the Worldview Weekend Hour with Brannon Howse. Whether the topic is law, science, government, economics, history, family, social issues, education, or theology, Brannon brings the issues of today into clear focus through the lens of a biblical worldview. And now, here is your host, Brannon Howse.
Welcome, my friends, to the program. Glad you're with us. Tonight we start a series on Marxianity. Marxianity would be a great name for it, the merging of Marxism with Christianity. In fact, I have a book coming out October 15th, 2018, by that very name, Marxianity. I don't know if anyone else has ever used that name before or not. I came up with it one day after I was on the radio. I was sitting there in my radio studio just kind of pondering the discussion that we'd been having on the radio of Marxism and Christianity merging. It's also known as liberation theology, the merging of Marxism and Christianity. And I thought, this is nothing more than Marxianity. And I thought, well, that's kind of a clever name, Marxianity. And so I was working on a new book, and that became the title of the book. We went out and we bought Marxianity.com, .org, and .net. And if you'd like to pre-order the book, you can do so right now at Marxianity.com. Appreciate your, by the way, pre-ordering the book because that allows us to be able to have it edited and laid out and all the expenses of putting together this book. It'll be about 250 pages, paperback, Marxianity. Now, we had announced a few months ago that we were done publishing actual physical books. From now on, it would be all ebooks. Well, we had a small rebellion. You guys had a small rebellion, and you emailed us, and you have called, and you've left messages, and you bombarded our resource table at our Ozarks Worldview Weekend, and you basically said you're not tolerating it. You're not going to stand for it. You want real physical books to be printed. And so, because we aim to please, we will do that, okay? So don't say that your opinion here doesn't count. It does. I had no intentions of actually printing physical books anymore and storing them and warehousing them and all that. This isn't going to go to flat ebooks. But we have heard your cries, and we will do what you want, and that is we'll actually physically print this book. We will offer it as an ebook, but we'll also physically be printing it as well. So if you appreciate that fact, why don't you go ahead and make a pre-order, which will help us again with the cost of the editing and the layout and ultimately the publishing of it, Marxianity, and you can order Marxianity the book at Marxianity.com, Marxianity.com. Well, let's talk about Marxism and Christianity, a dialectical deception. And I'll define the Hegelian dialectic process for you in just a minute. Many of you know what it is. We've talked about it for years, but some of you are new listeners, so we want to make sure you're up to speed. But first, look at this quote by Karl Marx. My object in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism. Well, here's a picture of Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School. And I've told you many times about the Frankfurt School, been writing and speaking about it for many years. I wrote about it in a whole chapter in my book that came out in 2009, wrote it in 2008, called Grave Influence, which, by the way, is available for you as an ebook in our Situation Room and in our bookstore. At situationroom.net. If you're a member, you automatically have all my books as an ebook. If you would like to order Grave Influence as either a hardcover or an ebook, you can do so in our bookstore at wvwtv.com/bookstore. So I've been telling you about the Frankfurt School for years and their desire to promote cultural Marxism. Well, I'm glad to say that the term cultural Marxism has gotten a lot of attention in the last 6 to 12 months. It's a term that's being used more and more And I can't tell you how happy that makes me in one sense, because all the years of writing about it and speaking about it, it seems as though now people are finally understanding the importance of understanding cultural Marxism. But it really came to America by the Frankfurt School, and Herbert Marcuse was one of the leaders of the Frankfurt School. And they came here to promote cultural Marxism. And they followed four people, one of them being Karl Marx. And we just saw that Karl Marx said, "My object in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism." One of the other people they followed was Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud believed Christians were insane because they believed in absolute truth. He said, Sigmund Freud did, that the truly sane individuals were those who had not rejected their natural inclinations to lust, cannibalism, incest, and killing. Yes, you heard that right. Sigmund Freud believed that the people who were truly sane were those who had not rejected their natural inclinations to lust, cannibalism, incest, and killing. The ones he said had gone crazy were the Christians, who suppressed those natural inclinations. So Sigmund Freud believed the Christians were the truly insane ones. And of course, what do we see today? People who hold the biblical truth are called what? Homophobic. If you believe in what the Bible teaches about one man, one woman in marriage, you're homophobic. You have an unreasonable fear or phobia. If you understand the worldview of Islam and that it's evil and that it is not consistent with a constitutional republic, and if you follow Islam as laid out in the Quran and the Hadith, you understand what this world religious system of Islam is really all about. It is an antichrist religion that seeks to persecute the Christians and the Jews and create a world global caliphate. And if you speak truth about Islam, you are called an Islamophobic, right? You're promoting Islamophobia. Again, you have an unreasonable fear. So notice again, it's the Christians and the conservatives that are being called crazy or having an unreasonable fear or phobia. Homophobic, Islamophobic, these kind of terminologies are used all the time to try to shame, embarrass, and silence those who speak truth. Well, again, that's what the Frankfurt School is all about. And should we be shocked when they followed someone like Sigmund Freud, who believed that Christians were insane? So they followed Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud. They followed Friedrich Nietzsche, who said God is dead. Of course, Adolf Hitler liked to have his picture taken staring at a bust of Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche believed in master morality and slave morality. And he said Christians would be the ones that would be easily enslaved because of their belief in absolute truth. So once again, Karl Marx hated Christians. He said, "My object in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism." Freud hated Christians. He said the Christians were the crazy ones. Friedrich Nietzsche believed that the Christians were easily enslaved because of their belief in absolute truth, their compassion for the sick and the infirmed. And of course, Friedrich Nietzsche wanted to create a Superman race, a human that would evolve to become a superhuman type character. And so Friedrich Nietzsche also liked to sign his name Friedrich Nietzsche the Antichrist, sometimes just simply the Antichrist. You notice a theme with the people that the Frankfurt School admired? They all hated Christians. They all hated God. The fourth person they liked to follow was George Hegel. He taught the idea of thesis and antithesis, idea, opposite idea. And those ideas must fight or conflict and then merge together to become a new idea or a new thesis. And then the process starts all over. And so these four people influenced the Frankfurt School. Herbert Marcuse is one of the leaders of the Frankfurt School. He coined the phrase, "make love, not war." And many of you are familiar with that phrase. He consulted many of the radicals in the 1960s. Well, Herbert Marcuse also said this: one can rightfully speak of a cultural revolution, and by the way, that's what he wanted, a cultural revolution. He wanted a cultural revolution, folks, through cultural Marxism. The Frankfurt School that came to America in 1933 at the invitation of John Dewey, that'd be the same John Dewey that signed the Humanist Manifesto, helped start the Socialist Society, helped start the American Civil Liberties Union with communist Roger Baldwin. John Dewey, who went to Russia to study the Karl Marx way of education in the late 20s, early 30s, and then came back to America and taught at Columbia University. John Dewey, who was involved in the National Education Association. You're getting an idea of the worldview of John Dewey? Well, he brought the Frankfurt School to America. The Frankfurt School was openly a Marxist institution. They were started in Germany in 1923. When Hitler came to power, some of them being of Jewish descent got nervous, decided it was time to leave, And so they came to America in 1933. John Dewey dropped them down at Brandeis, Berkeley, Princeton to have a cultural revolution. And they said that they would go after education and media, and change the worldview and the values and thus the conduct of America through a cultural revolution. But they couldn't call it just flat out Marxism, so they called it political correctness. It was critical theory, all kinds of other names they had. But they wanted a revolution. But first, to have a revolution, they had to change the worldview of the American people. And by the way, this would not be a Marxist revolution at the end of a gun. That's what makes them a new kind of Marxist, or neo-Marxist. It was going to be a cultural Marxism, a cultural revolution, a culture war. So Herbert Marcuse said, one can rightfully speak of a cultural revolution since the protest is directed toward the whole cultural establishment, including the morality of existing society. There is one thing we can say with complete assurance. The traditional idea of revolution and the traditional strategy of revolution has ended. These ideas are old-fashioned. What we must undertake is a type of diffuse and dispersed disintegration of the system, end quote. Now notice what he says. This new revolution, this cultural revolution, must be a protest directed toward the whole cultural establishment. That means everything that the society or culture is based on. Family, church, government, morality, media, education. They're going to have a worldview revolution. They're going to go after every power center or power structure that they can. And again, that includes the family, the church, education, media, and the government. And they must attack the morality of the culture. Well, when they came to America in 1933, what was the morality of America? It was a very, for the most part, God-fearing nation. There was a heavy emphasis and belief in God, absolute truth, the Ten Commandments, right and wrong, no sex before marriage. That was, whether it was practiced by everyone or not, that's not the issue. It was a morality that existed, the idea of being a virgin until one was married, the idea that you did not cohabitate. Abortion was something not talked about. Homosexuality, although it went on in the shadows, was not talked about. In the 1960s, I Love Lucy, they couldn't even show Ricky and Lucy in bed together. They had to be in twin beds. The censors wouldn't allow them to even be shown in bed together, and that was in the 1960s. So you can imagine how much more conservative things were in the 1930s when the Frankfurt School got here in 1933. They couldn't even use the word pregnant on the episode of I Love Lucy. In the TV series I Dream of Jeannie, they could not show her navel. Censors wouldn't allow it. And again, these are shows in the 1960s. So it's showing you what the morality of the nation was. Well, again, imagine how conservative the morality was in the 1930s, particularly 1933, when the Frankfurt School shows up. And they're going to have a cultural revolution and attack the morality of the nation. So they decide to go after the issue of sexuality, the family. And they openly talked about the need to go after a patriarchal society, destroy the American male, and go from a patriarchal society to a matriarchal society. And eventually they would go from masculinity and femininity being done away with to a general humanness. No masculinity, no femininity, a general humanness. Does that go on today? Absolutely it does. And by destroying the American male, they knew they could create bigger government. Remember, that's the ultimate goal, is Marxism. But you have to do this by changing the culture. So you destroy the family, the incubator for passing on the values of a constitutional republic and the free market system. You destroy the family by taking away the father, destroying the American male, down-talking the American male, ridiculing the American male. Promoting feminism, which is anti-family, anti-father, denigration of marriage and family. So you destroy the American male, you take away the responsibilities of the American male, you don't hold up a high standard for what men are to do when it comes to family and children and their wife and their spouse. The family starts to break down. As family breaks down, there's now the need for bigger government. Now, instead of having a husband in the home that provides for the family, the government becomes the daddy. Uncle Sam becomes the daddy through a welfare state. Now we're moving toward the ideas of socialism, redistribution of wealth, a progressive income tax system that taxes one to give to another. You see how this works? But to create the acceptance of Marxism, or the economic philosophies of Karl Marx, socialism, you have to change the values and morality of the society. And when you destroy the morality of the society, you destroy absolute truth, marriage, family, high moral standards. Ideas have consequences, and what happens? Now the government steps in with more government programs, government, bigger taxation to solve the consequences and the societal ills that have now been created. But again, this has been a manufactured crisis. It was being done on purpose so that the people would willingly accept socialism. Do you hear what I just said? The crisis was being manufactured. The destruction of morality and family and marriage and values and patriotism were all being destroyed on purpose to create a crisis that then the solution could be offered up of bigger government. So again, he says that a cultural revolution must take place, and this is a protest that is directed toward the whole cultural establishment, including the morality of existing society. And that's what we see. And in 1965, Herbert Marcuse wrote a paper called Repressive Tolerance. And here's what he says about how to deal with people who are Christians. Because it's Christians that believe in absolute truth. And by believing in absolute truth, we are said to be intolerant, right? Jesus, of course, to them is the most intolerant. For it was in John chapter 14, verse 6 that Jesus declared, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except by me. That is the exclusivity of Jesus Christ. That is a narrow way. The Bible says narrow is the way, and few who find it. Broad is the path to destruction. So you have the exclusivity of Jesus Christ. That's very intolerant in today's world, right? When postmodernism says truth and reality are created by man, not by God. Universalism, everybody's going to get to heaven. If you believe in a spiritual hereafter, everybody's going to get there. Of course, your secular humanists believe you die and that's it. But very few people today are secular humanist. The dominant worldview today is really cosmic humanism or New Age. And so to proclaim that to get to heaven in the hereafter is only through Jesus Christ, that is a narrow way and that is intolerant. So how do you deal with the intolerant Christians that believe in absolute truth? Salvation through Christ alone, the exclusivity of Jesus Christ, the traditional biblical definition of marriage and morality. How do you, and free market capitalism that is based on the idea of individualism, individual work, individual responsibility. In the area of faith, we believe in individual salvation. How do you take on these Christians with their belief in absolute truth and their worldview that impacts law and science and economics and family and history and education? How do you deal with these Christians? You paint them as the enemy. And we know they're already following four guys that hate Christians. Karl Marx hated Christians. Sigmund Freud hated Christians. Friedrich Nietzsche hated Christians. And of course, so did George Hegel. So how do you set up the Christians? The source and suffering of all oppression, they would proclaim, is Christianity and capitalism. Christianity and capitalism is the source of all suffering and oppression. So Herbert Marcuse said what we have to do is set up a victim coalition, people who are being oppressed, and show that their oppressors are the Christians and the capitalists. And we have to show that these people are narrow-minded, bigots, intolerant, racist, chauvinists, greedy, who must be treated in a manner that is more intolerant than even they are. Herbert Marcuse proclaimed the way to deal with his perceived intolerance of the capitalists and the Christians was to be even more intolerant than the Christians and the capitalists as he described them. Here's what he said in this paper written in 1965. They would include the withdrawal of toleration of speech and assembly from groups and movements which promote aggressive policies, armament, chauvinism, discrimination on the grounds of race and religion, or which oppose the extension of public services, Social Security, Medicare, etc. Liberating tolerance, then, would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. As to the scope of this tolerance and intolerance, it would extend to the stage of action, as well as of discussion and propaganda, of deed, as well as of word, end quote. So notice what he's saying here. We're going to withdraw the toleration of speech and assembly from conservatives, capitalists, Christians, those that believe in absolute truth. And by the way, that's exactly what happened to us in April of 2018. We were only able to carry out one of 5 of our Worldview Weekend rallies that I was going to speak at, along with some guys on Islam and national security issues, such as Shahram Hadian, a former Muslim, now Christian pastor, Chris Gobbets, who infiltrated CARE undercover, a former FBI agent. We were shut down because groups like the Gamaliel Network, a network that was based on the worldview of Saul Alinsky, Saul the Red Alinsky, a neo-Marxist, whose director in 1986 became Gregory Galuzzo. Gregory Galuzzo, by the way, was a Jesuit priest at one time who studied Saul Alinsky, the neo-Marxist Saul Alinsky. And he's the one that convinced Barack Obama to move to Chicago and to become a Saul Alinsky community organizer. In fact, it is Barack Obama himself in print that says that Gregory Galuzzo was mostly responsible for him winning the primary in Iowa against Hillary Clinton and thus becoming president of the United States. And did you know that that group took part in helping to shut down our Worldview Weekend rallies? And we have screenshots of social media where they're bragging that they were able to do that. So here you have the Gamaliel Network, along with Islamic groups, Antifa groups, communist groups known as Antifa groups, the Southern Poverty Law Center, which I believe is a communist front group, all working together to give out the name and address and phone number of all the hotels we were going to be at, and then call them and say that we are haters, we're bigots, that we're a hate group. Don't let us use their hotel ballroom, even though we had a contract for 6 months and spent thousands of dollars promoting and mailed out 80,000 full-color magazines and spent 6 months promoting these 5 cities, which, by the way, we announced that these would be our last 5 cities to do other than our annual conference in the Ozarks because of the cost of security becoming so high. The threats against our conferences and thus the cost of security was becoming so high that we announced these were going to be our last 5 cities. We couldn't even carry out these 5 cities. Why? Because the strategy of Herbert Marcuse and the Frankfurt School and the cultural Marxists was carried out to be intolerant and to withdraw toleration of speech and assembly from groups they don't agree with. Groups, Christian groups, conservative groups, free market groups, groups that talk about national security, absolute truth, and groups that are exposing the Marxist and Islamicist and what they're trying to do with their revolution in America. Shut them down. Be intolerant. Deprive them of their freedom of speech and assembly. And that's exactly what happened to us. And then they go on to say they must oppose the groups that believe in armament. That'd be building up your national military. Groups they say are chauvinistic. Well, how are we chauvinistic? Because we believe in the biblical role of men, the biblical role of women, traditional marriage. But you see, these phrases are all being used today, aren't they? Chauvinist, xenophobia, all kinds of words being used to misogynist, to describe Christians or capitalists or conservatives, right? This is not new. This is right out of the playbook of the cultural Marxists in the Frankfurt School to make the source of all suffering and oppression to be traditional Americans, Christians, people of faith, or conservatives. And so this is exactly what Herbert Marcuse said. And they would have no tolerance for people on the right, but they would have tolerance for those on the left. And this would extend to the point of being action, not just words, folks, but action and propaganda. And that's exactly what we see going on today. Propaganda, lies, information operation. And many of our young people and many Americans have been subject to this propaganda, this information operation, this culture war, and this false narrative that says it's Christianity and capitalism that's the source of all suffering and oppression. Well, here's a book that Herbert Marcuse wrote in 1955 called Eros and Civilization. Eros, that's from which we get the word erotica. And what was the purpose of this book? The purpose of the book was to declare that whatever was not mainstreamed and accepted in the area of sexual liberation, should be mainstreamed and accepted. Because again, what's the goal of Herbert Marcuse? To attack the existing morality of all cultural establishments. So in 1955, he writes this book, Eros and Civilization, and calls for mainstreaming pretty much any sexual perversion that you can think of. Now, why would he want to do that? To destroy traditional morality, to destroy marriage, to destroy the incubator for passing on traditional values upon which our constitutional republic is built, the family. And that's what our founding fathers believed. They believed the family was the incubator for passing on the values that would maintain a constitutional republic. And by the way, as a constitutional republic, what does that mean? That means we don't make laws that contradict the law of God. William Blackstone, the leading scholar for the founding fathers, openly wrote about that. A constitutional republic is not based on the will of the majority or the will of the 51%, or what the founding fathers called mobocracy. A constitutional republic, said William Blackstone, the leading scholar for the founding fathers, was based on the character and nature of God. What God has ruled for, we don't rule against. That's the basis of a constitutional republic. And that would be represented in the laws of God. Also represented in the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not murder, right? And this is the moral code for most civilized nations, of course, obviously for America. But if you're going to have a cultural revolution, you must destroy morality, absolute truth, the family. And so you must mainstream that which is not accepted and consistent with that traditional conservative, biblical, Judeo-Christian worldview. And so Herbert Marcuse says if we're going to attack the existing morality of the society and carry out our cultural revolution and destroy the family, and thus the result will be the need for bigger government and redistribution of wealth and the government becoming the provider for the family, and thus the need to have a more progressive income tax system that takes from one and gives to another. We got to destroy that family. We got to destroy traditional values. We must attack the existing morality of the entire cultural establishment. So that's why he wanted to mainstream every sexual liberation movement possible. And he openly wrote in his books and papers and in his speeches, he talked about and wrote about the need for a victim coalition, a coalition of victims, non-whites, poor, the sexual liberation movement, so there'd be your homosexuals, illegal immigrants, radical feminist Marxist. So you take all these groups and you say, now look at the non-whites or the poor or the sexual liberation movement, the homosexuals, the illegal immigrants, the radical feminist Marxists. Who's mistreating them? Who's depriving them of their right to carry out their ideas and worldview? It's those Christians and capitalists. So he had to create a victim coalition and then say, who are their oppressors? Christians and capitalists. Therefore, Christianity and capitalism are evil. And by the way, capitalism, or the free market principles, actually comes from the second generation reformers. They understood individual responsibility, the work ethic, the idea of you put your hand to the plow and you gain wealth over the course of time. And of course, here in America, when the colonies were being formed, Mr. Bradford and the colonies tried socialism and it didn't work. And they went to the free market capitalist system that the second generation reformers understood to be the most biblical system, not a perfect system, but the most biblical system of economics, a free market system. So Christianity and capitalism are highly tied together because of what the Bible says about private contract, a work ethic, if you don't work, you don't eat, not stealing, not coveting, not cheating people, not lying, gaining wealth over the course of time from your hard work. Wealth isn't evil. Money isn't evil. It's the love of money. And so they knew if they could destroy biblical Christianity and the free market system and blame all the source of suffering and oppression as being from Christianity and capitalism, they'd be well on their way to convincing people to reject Christianity and capitalism. So to do that, he had to create a victim coalition and say, look at who's mistreating these people. Who are their oppressors? Christians and capitalists. And who are their oppressors? White males, white capitalists, white Christians, white conservatives. But reality is, many people of different pigmentation, skin color, because there's only one race, the human race. Acts 17 says that. There's not many races. There's one race, the human race. But there is difference in skin pigmentation. But black Americans have not actually suffered under the free market capitalist system. It is actually under President Obama and his socialist policies that black Americans did worse, according not to me, but according to Larry Elder, a conservative black American. He wrote an article in townhall.com, July 23, 2015, entitled, "Under Obama, Blacks Are Worse Off." Far worse. He says, quote, in 2009, when Obama took office, the black poverty rate was 25.8%. As of 2014, according to Pew Research Center, the black poverty rate was 27.2%. Here's an article by Thomas Sowell, also a black conservative, written September 27th, 2016, entitled "Favors to Blacks." He writes, quote, in 1960, before this expansion of the welfare state, 22% of black children were raised with only one parent. By 1985, 67% of black children were raised with either one parent or no parent, end quote. So notice that. What is causing the need for more government programs? The breakdown of the family. When you had a two-parent home, what did you have? You had low unemployment, low welfare. You had people thriving under a two-parent home. You had lower crime because, again, you have a father there to raise and disciple and teach and train his children. But as the family broke apart, what did you see? The increase of crime, the increase of the need for a bigger government, thus more taxation, a progressive income tax system, and stealing from one to give to another. So again, you see why going after the family was crucial to their ideas? But has it been free market capitalism that has enslaved people? No. It has been socialism that has enslaved people. As more socialist policies and their lack of morality was implemented, you saw more suffering and oppression. So the real source of all suffering and oppression has not been free market capitalism, it has been socialism. Socialism is the economic philosophy of Karl Marx. Communism. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1948. And under communism, you have had well over 500 million people killed. Over 500 million people easily have been killed because of communism. They've been enslaved. Simply look at the failed nations that have tried communism. In modern day, look to Venezuela with their inflation rate in 2017 of 2,100%. Socialism, Venezuela, fail. Cuba, fail. It is not Christians and their biblical worldview that has produced the free market system from the second generation reformers that has caused people to suffer and be oppressed. It is actually the leftist, the socialist, the communist, the Marxists. It has been the free market capitalist system that has set people free. Here's a book written by Jason Riley entitled "Please Stop Helping Us." This is also written by a black author. It's subtitled "How Liberals Make It Harder for Blacks to Succeed." He writes, quote, "Why is it that so many efforts by liberals to lift the black underclass not only fail, but often harm the intended beneficiaries?" In "Please Stop Helping Us," Jason L. Riley examines how well-intentioned welfare programs are in fact holding black Americans back. Minimum wage laws may lift earnings for people who are already employed, but they price a disproportionate number of blacks out of the labor force. Affirmative action in higher education is intended to address past discrimination, but the result is fewer black college graduates than would otherwise exist. And so it goes with everything from soft on crime laws, which make black neighborhoods more dangerous, to policies that limit school choice out of a mistaken belief that charter schools and voucher programs harm the traditional public schools that most low-income students attend. In theory, these efforts are intended to help the poor, and poor minorities in particular. In practice, they became massive barriers to moving forward, end quote. So we see it is not free market capitalism and Christians that have enslaved people. It's the liberals, the progressives, the socialists, the cultural Marxists. But how is it that so many people today want socialism? Surveys today, new surveys show that 58% of millennials want to live under some type of socialist or communist system, be it socialism, communism, or fascism. How is that so? Why is it that such a large percentage of Americans are negative, not only about Christianity, but negative about our nation, our founding, our form of government, and our economic system of free market capitalism? That is because the Frankfurt School openly said when they came to America in 1933 that to have this cultural Marxist revolution, they had to go after education and media. Education and media. And they would use education and media to change the worldview, thus the values, thus the conduct of the American people. So we have gotten where we are today due to an information operation. An information operation. In fact, this information operation, largely carried out through America's educational system first, was so bad, even in the 1940s, that the POWs of the Korean War could not withstand the communist propaganda of the communist. In the 1940s, the state of education in America was so poor at teaching traditional values, traditional economics, and the defense of our form of government, a constitutional republic, the basis of our laws and our economic system, the defense of such American ideals and philosophies and principles were so poorly defined and taught or defended in the 1940s that the POWs in the 1950s in the Korean War were easy marks for the information operation of the communist. In fact, so many POWs were willingly brainwashed by the communists as POWs that many of them would just simply pull the covers up over their head, and within a few days they'd be dead. John Stormer writes about this in his excellent book, None Dare Call It Treason. He writes about how many POWs, a good percentage of them, during the Korean War would become so downcast due to the propaganda of the communists that they couldn't fight off, that instead of helping their sick soldier friend, comrade, when their friend would contract dysentery, some soldiers would become so irritated they would pick them up and throw them out into the snow where they would freeze to death. Well, after the Korean War, the military wanted to know how is it and why is it that so many American POWs could not defend the principles and ideals of a constitutional republic? What has gone wrong in our educational system? Because you see what happened is the communists were giving them a little book on how evil America is and how great communism is and what an evil nation America is. And you know, this little book was written at a communist school in New York, the Jefferson School. This little book was written by the communists in New York at the Jefferson School. It ended up in Korea, where the communists used it to indoctrinate American POWs and say to them, look at how evil the nation is you're fighting for. Now, these POWs could not fight off this information operation. They did not have enough knowledge, enough training, enough history, enough proper education. They didn't have enough facts to destroy the arguments raised up by the communists against America that were all lies. They could not withstand the information operation. Now, folks, if that was the state of education in the 1940s that produced some POWs in the 1950s and the Korean War, what do you think the state of education has been in America since then? Is it better or is it far worse? Now you know why it is we're losing ground with so many Americans, old and young, who have come through our educational system. Then you add the influence of the media on top of it. Well, again, the government was so concerned about what was going on with our Korean War POWs that a study was commissioned. And a report was put out by Major William E. Mayer, United States Army. And the report was called Brainwashing, the Ultimate Weapon. And it was released on October 4th, 1956. And it stated that the problem was that American POWs did not know enough about American history and the facts about our founding and the reason we believe what we believe and the reason we have the system that we have of branches of government and checks and balances and our constitutional republic. They couldn't defend this history and heritage and our form of government. And they were easily taken captive by the lies of the communist. Well, we now move from the Korean War to the Vietnam War. And there was another information operation that took place, both within the educational system and largely within the media, to turn the hearts of Americans against fighting the communists and winning the war in Vietnam. In fact, the highest ranking officer to defect from the USSR to the US ended up writing a book entitled Through the Eyes of the Enemy. Here's what he wrote, quote, "What will be a great surprise to the American people is that the GRU and the KGB had a larger budget for anti-war propaganda in the United States than it did for economic and military support for the Vietnamese. The anti-war propaganda cost the GRU more than $1 billion. But as history shows, it was a hugely successful campaign and well worth the cost. The anti-war sentiment created an incredible momentum that greatly weakened the U.S. military," end quote. The GRU, by the way, is the military intelligence wing of the USSR. So they had the KGB, which many of you are familiar with, and then they had the GRU, which would be their military intelligence. They spent, according to this former high-ranking USSR military official, the USSR spent over $1 billion in America carrying out an information operation. What that means is the USSR spent over $1 billion to produce, pay for, and distribute propaganda, anti-American propaganda, lies, and information operation, largely through education and the media. Well, who is funding a lot of this other than the USSR? Would you be shocked to find out that much of this anti-American, anti-Christian, globalist, statist, socialistic, progressive worldview was also promoted by American foundations? So we're being indoctrinated as a nation by people outside America, like the USSR, but also liberal, progressive, socialist, communists within the United States of America who are running wealthy foundations. How do we know this? Well, here is Congressman B. Carroll Reece of the Reece Committee. He is from my home state of Tennessee. And he ran a committee called the Reece Committee that released a report on foundations. And the report was released in 1954. And one of the researchers of the report is a man by the name of Norman Dodd. And what did the report reveal? The report revealed that American foundations, big, wealthy American foundations, were indeed using their millions upon millions of dollars to influence the writing of American textbooks and to promote the idea of collectivism, socialism, not to promote the idea of individual responsibility, individual hard work, individual rights, but the idea of collective salvation, collectivism, socialism, redistribution of wealth. The Reece Committee found that American foundations were spending millions of dollars to influence our educational system and brainwash America's children with an information operation that would allow for the acceptance of socialist ideals and policies in America. Are you aware of this history? From the Frankfurt School coming to America in 1933, to the educational system of the 1940s that produced men in the 1950s in the Korean War that could not stand up against the information operation propaganda of the communists as POWs, To the Reese Committee and its report from 1954 that showed that American foundations were spending millions of dollars to brainwash the American children in socialistic ideals. And that brings us to 1983, when Ronald Reagan in 1983 commissioned a report to study the state of America's educational system. And this report was released in 1983, and it was entitled A Nation at Risk. I wrote my first book in the early 90s, 1993. My second book came out in 1995, and it was on the state of education in America, and it was called A Nation at Risk. Well, Ronald Reagan formed a committee to study the state of education, and their 1983 report was released called A Nation at Risk. And here's what it said, quote, "If an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre education performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war," end quote. That's powerful. We have destroyed ourselves from within. And the end result today, through this information operation, this propaganda war that has criticized America, America's traditional foundational values, the basis of our constitutional republic, the free market system, individual responsibility, has led now in 2018 to a huge percentage of millennials that want to live under some form of communism. Here's an article from the Washington Times dated November 4th, 2017. The headline, "Millennials would rather live in socialist or communist nation than under capitalism." The article says, quote, "The majority of millennials would prefer to live in a socialist, communist, or fascist nation rather than a capitalistic one. 58%, according to a new poll." Well, my friends, this information operation that went on within education and the media to create today's results of 58% of millennials wanting to live under either socialism, fascism, or communism has also occurred within evangelicalism. Today, we have well-known evangelical leaders that are thought to be Bible Christians, people who are supposedly all about the gospel. I'm not talking about left-wing mainline churches. I'm talking about people part of the Gospel Coalition and Together for the Gospel. People who are running so-called Bible ministries are promoting cultural Marxism. They are promoting socialism. They are promoting redistribution of wealth. They are playing right into the hands of the cultural Marxist and saying America is a racist nation, that we are steeped in racism. People like David Platt, who are saying that racism is alive and well, is evident by high unemployment in the black community, crime in the black community. And that what we need to do, he says in his speech at Together for the Gospel, is bring progressives and conservatives together and blend our worldview. And he was quoting from a book called Divided by Faith, written by two progressives, one of them who had written a book defending liberation theology, which is the mixture of Marxism and Christianity. And yet David Platt is now the Bible teacher of the well-known historic program called Back to the Bible that airs on hundreds of stations across America. You see, there is now an information operation that has and is going on within evangelicalism, so-called conservative evangelicalism. We know about the Federal Council of Churches, the National Council of Churches, Walter Rauschenbusch, Harry F. Ward, and all these leftists. But I'm talking about what is supposed to be conservative evangelicals are now openly embracing the idea of mixing Christianity with Marxism for liberation theology, or what I call Marxianity. As we look to conclude and pick it up next week, look at this. This is a report by Julian Huxley. You'd know his brother, Aldous Huxley. Julian Huxley was the first executive director of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And in 1946, Julian Huxley wrote this report, UNESCO, Its Purpose and Its Philosophy. And here's what he said, quote, "The task is to help the emergence of a single world culture." That's globalism, folks. So again, he says, quote, "The task is to help the emergence of a single world culture, At the moment, two opposing philosophies of life confront each other. You may categorize the two philosophies as supernationalism, or as individualism versus collectivism, or as capitalism versus communism, or as Christianity versus Marxism. Can these opposites be reconciled? This antithesis be resolved in a higher synthesis? I believe not only that this can happen, but that through the inexorable dialectic of evolution, it must happen, end quote. What is Julian Huxley saying? Opposites can collide and mix together and merge together to produce a new thesis or a new idea. And he lays it out. Individualism versus collectivism. Capitalism versus communism. Christianity versus Marxism. These are opposites. No one thinks these can get along. But yet, Julian Huxley says they must fight. They must conflict with each other till they merge together in a synthesis, the Hegelian dialectic process promoted by George Hegel, one of the four people that the Frankfurt School loved. And when this conflict commences, the end result will be a mixture of Christianity with Marxism. And now we have a new thesis. It'll be the mixture of capitalism with socialism, Christianity with Marxism. And that's exactly where we are today. Today, the mixture of socialism and capitalism is also known as communitarianism, or Fabian socialism, or the third way, or the common good. And today, they're merging Christianity and Marxism, and they call it social justice, the social gospel. Many different names, but it is nothing more than the merging of Marxism and Christianity for what I call Marxianity, the title of my book coming out in October of 2018. Well, next week we'll pick it up and we'll look at Acts chapter 16. And we'll see that Satan loves to use the Hegelian dialectic process. And we are now seeing, right in front of our face, the merging of Marxism and Christianity through a dialectical deception. We'll also look at one of the leading proponents of merging Marxism and Christianity, the co-founder of the Gospel Coalition, Tim Keller, as we continue our series on Christianity and Marxism, a dialectical deception. Now, if you appreciate this broadcast, and not only this broadcast, but the many other programs we bring to you, it is urgent that we hear from you here in June of 2018. The summer months are some of the toughest months for all ministries. People get busy, kids are out of school, they're on vacation, but yet we continue to produce brand new radio shows each and every day and brand new television shows each and every week. Our ministry cannot stop. We cannot take a break during the summer. There is so much to cover and produce and to push out to you so that we can give you the knowledge that you need so that you can have the biblical wisdom necessary to earnestly contend for the faith. So please don't forget about us during these summer months. And you can support us through one of two ways. Number one is by making a tax-deductible contribution at wvwfoundation.com. That's wvwfoundation.com. You can also send a check. You'll find our mailing address there on the screen. Or you can use our number, 901-853-8792. However you give, or however much you give, thank you for supporting our ministry, our broadcast ministry, right now with a tax-deductible contribution. We right now are expanding our studio. We're moving into a brand new studio for television that'll be about 3 times the size of our old studio. That's going to enable us to do a lot more, as well as do Friday night, all-day Saturday conferences. Since we can't rent hotel ballrooms apparently anymore, other than our one conference every year in the Ozarks, we've decided to expand our television studio and bring our conferences and bring more of them in-house into our TV studio. But our TV studio right now is so small that other than myself and one other person, that's all I can get on the set. This new set will be 3 times larger. We'll be able to have a swinging boom camera in there for better broadcast quality production, but we'll also be able to have 5 or 6 people on the set at the same time for panel discussions. So while you're watching this live streaming conference, you'll be able to email in your questions and we'll turn around and ask the panel your question. Right now, we can't get those people into the studio. It's too small. Our new studio will allow us to have a whole panel. And we're going to do more Friday night, all-day Saturday conferences that you can watch right on your iPhone, your iPad, your Android, through our Roku channel. By the way, we need to redo our Roku channel. By the end of 2018, the end of this year, December 31st, will be the last day our Roku channel will work. On January 1st, 2019, our Roku channel, our free Roku channel, will not work anymore because we have to redo the computer code. Roku's making us redo it. Everybody has to redo their computer code. That alone will cost $5,700 to redo that. We also need to update our app. We have not done an update on our app in a long time. We need to update our app for iPhone, iPad, and Android. That's going to cost a few $1,000s. Our new studio, we've put several $1,000s into remodeling and updating this new expanded area in our home base for this new TV studio. So it's vital we hear from you, not to mention our ongoing cost in computer streaming and bandwidth and computer programmers. So support us, would you please, through the Worldview Weekend Foundation at WVW Foundation or by sending a check. The second way you can support us is by joining the Situation Room at situationroom.net and having access to over $145,000 in growing of ebooks, audiobooks, transcripts, Bible software, our worldviewpedia.com biblical worldview software. You have access to that as a member of the Situation Room. 2 clubs for the price of 1. You can join for as little as $9.99 a month, $99 a year. $149 for 2 years, or you can join at the 3-year rate of $199 and save $100. Situationroom.net, and just go to the bottom of the page and click the join button, situationroom.net. So support us in one or both of those ways, will you please? WVWFoundation.com or situationroom.net. Thank you so much for watching part 1 of Christianity and Marxism, a dialectical deception. Next week we'll pick it up with part 2. Till then, I'm Brandon House. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.